All right. Uh, this class, let's talk about the transition from authoritarianism. This video, we will talk about transitions from authoritarianism, but it's more um, that we will talk a lot about China. So you may be wondering what's Russia doing up there. Well, Russia, I think, serves as an example for China, a warning of what can happen when one transitions towards democracy from being authoritarian regimes. So, in that particularly, when you are communist regime, you if you move towards democracy, um, mm, no, I'm not going to talk very much about Russia's history, and we understand that Russia was a very repressive monarchy as a czarist system. The Russian czars were, it was very rural, agricultural kind of country, which in 1905, uh, but really in 1917, had a revolution, the first successful communist revolution, that there was a um, right transitioning from a monarchy to being a um, communist revolution, communist regime. And then the communist regime remained in place until 1990. And I am not going to talk very much about the nature of actual communist regime, but just it's suffice to say that it was totalitarian regime. There was a communist party that controlled the state completely, and it strove not just it strove not just to have a political power. It wasn't just an authoritarian regime. It wanted to change the economics of the country so that it became a state-controlled economy, and it also wanted to change the people, pushing them to become socialist, and basically outlawing most contact with the West and intellectual contacts with the West. It's trying to create a new societal um, um, it tried to create a new socialist beings, and so that's the Soviet Russia that we have got, the I mean the Soviet Union, USSR. Now that we are more concerned about the its uh, democratic transition, and its democratic transition was largely the product of a man whom I think, if you remember, it's Mikhail Gorbachev, who a lot of people might recognize him with a uh, typical birthmark, signature birthmark on his forehead when he was younger, but I mean, about the time. So what happened was, Soviet Union was going through a period in which a leader, I mean, that it had really a very few leaders throughout the period. Right, it went from Stalin to Khrushchev to Brezhnev, and then in the early 80s there was a rapid succession of two or more leaders, like Andropov and Chernenko, who were put into powers when they were very old, and they died very quickly after being put into power. Which I think one of them, I think they hid the fact that he was dead. He was dead, and they in fact had a body double show up for some of his parades and things like that. So what happened was that, that the Communist Party was kind of like caught unprepared, because they usually always knew who was going to be the next in line for succession, but with two leaders dying in such rapid fire, suddenly there wasn't a clear who the leader should be, and they and then they chose younger person, a person who was maybe a little bit more open to the politics of the West, and that happened to be Mikhail Gorbachev. So let's talk about the kind of policies he put in place. Well, the first thing was the this known as glasnost, which is simply saying, let's open up that discussion right um, mm, before. It's true, we did throw you in jail when you mentioned Western policy, but let's open up a discussion of how we can catch up with the West. That was the thinking of the Russians that time, particularly the Mikhail Gorbachev. He clearly thought that West is outpacing Russia economically, and and they know that Russia was fairly doing well in the 60s and 70s. Their growth was even faster because they were coming from further behind. But by the 1970s, the socialist economies of Eastern Europe, including that of United States, and including that of USSR, had really stagnated. I mean, they were good at building roads and power plants and things like that, but they weren't good at satisfying or buying people's wants for consumer goods, and because everything was run by the state may not be the best person to understand what consumers want again. uh, I'm not big opponent of state being involved in the economy, but it depends on what kind of things we are talking about. If we are talking about providing education and healthcare, I think that state can play a good role. But if state is trying to tell me what shoes I have to wear, what clothes I have to wear, it becomes a problematic in my mind. So anyway, they said we are opening to the discussion of new ideas, perhaps even ideas about capitalism, or more importantly, that there was this principle of perestroika, which said we are prepared also to subject ourselves to critiques and to change, to actually, change policies. Now, this was mostly meant to be economic. They mostly meant for the people who were working higher up in production facilities and manufacturing and things like that. They were supposed to say or tell the central regime, what you should be doing differently. How can a capitalist system may be helpful for us to produce more efficiently? But what really happened was the critique came fast and furious, and as people realized they could criticize more things, they also started criticizing not just democratic enough, um, they started criticizing um, even the political regime, even the non democratic regimes. Now, this really um, got a lot of people very worried. Some of the Eastern European um, countries that were satellite states of Soviet Union started to break up from the Soviet Union, becoming independent, and but Soviet Union did nothing about it in the face of such in the face of such inaction or allowing this to go forward. Some people in the party, hardliners, are like real communists, the older generation. They attempted a coup in 1991, And what happened was some of the people in their parliament, and again, it was a parliament that wasn't a very open parliament because everybody was communist in there. Um, but there was those communists who were open to greater democratic and greater democracy, and one of those leaders among them is Boris Yeltsin, who ended up becoming the first president of Russia. I mean, Boris Yeltsin, the premier. Uh, he and many other reformers stood up to the people who were trying to form a coup, and those who were instituting the coup told the army to go in there and wipe out Yeltsin and his supporter. But army did not intervene. They let them stand. um they let them have a stand there. That was one of the biggest movement in the world history. That was the moment at which Russia moved away from being communist, because otherwise it would have been just another failed attempt. It could have been a failed attempt, and this led very quickly to the dissolution of Soviet Union. And I don't really want to talk about the nature of Russia today and whether it's really that democratic or not. But what we are more concerned about is this part here, this idea of how Russia transitioned, mm, um, really uh, uh, transitioned from authoritarian regime, and the snowballing when you start making economic reforms, do political reforms, and democracy came afterwards. And the reason why that is important for us, uh, that's what we were concerned here. We're not going to talk about Russia anymore for the rest of the course, but the Russian example and those of many other socialist Eastern European countries are in the minds of Chinese leadership and the Chinese people. And what we see with China is a transition to capitalism, which is far more measured and far more controlled. And I think part of the reason why is this because they have always got the Russian example in the back of their mind. Uh, so that being said, let's move on to talk about China. Again, um, China's case, it's going to be a 2000 year history in 3 minutes kind of things. I just wanted us to look at certain movements in political history of China. China being an empire of 2000 year, I mean, there were dynasties before then, but one of the natures of China is China was not so solely rural. It was pretty urbanized society, as we um, can tell. I mean, if you look at China now, it has many cities. I think 20 cities or so, over 5 million population each. I mean, it's huge. So with these urban center, they had pretty strong economy already, and China was a great trader of that region before the West come in there. Now that's one of the things to think about. It was already a economic power. China was already an economic power. Another element of China's is its culture, shaped by somewhat heavily by the teachings of, again, not a religion but a philosophy of Confucius. It's Confucianism, and some of its ideas and values um, came out of those belief system, or the idea that group might be important than the individual. Um, so it's the which is different from the Western values.